In 1903, two brothers with no funding, no engineering degrees, and no government backing beat the most well-resourced aeronautical project in America to build the first flying machine. Samuel Langley had everything. The Wright brothers had one thing he didn't. They believed flight would change the world. Welcome to Whispering Pages. If you're here just for the summary, skip to the next chapter. For the rest of us, let's ease in. Let the room hold you for a moment. Notice the stillness. You're already somewhere quiet. The brain just before sleep is unusually receptive. What you take in now tends to consolidate overnight. Tonight, start with Why by Simon Sinek, published in 2009. A book about what actually makes people follow someone, and why the answer has almost nothing to do with what you sell. So let's begin. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let's whisper through this one together. In the early 1900s, the United States government wanted to be the first to build a flying machine. They gave the project to a man named Samuel Langley. He had everything going for him: a prestigious position at the Smithsonian Institution, a $50,000 government grant, a dream team of engineers, and glowing coverage from the New York Times. He hired the best minds money could find and worked in full view of the public, with every advantage a project leader could want. A few hundred miles away, in Dayton, Ohio, two brothers were working on the same problem. Orville and Wilbur Wright had no government funding, no university connections, no formal engineering training. They ran a bicycle shop. Their team was made up of a handful of mechanics who believed in what they were doing, not because they were paid well, but because they were inspired by the idea itself. On December 17, 1903, at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the Wright brothers flew. When Langley heard the news, he quit. He had wanted the fame and the title of being first. The brothers wanted something more. They believed flight would change the world. This is where Simon Sinek begins his book. And this contrast between Langley's resources and the Wright brothers' belief sets up the central question he spends the whole book answering. Why do some people and organizations inspire loyalty and lasting success, when others, with far more advantages, don't? Sinek's answer is a framework he calls the Golden Circle. 3 concentric rings. The outermost ring is what? The products you sell, the services you offer, the things you actually do. Every organization on earth knows their what. The middle ring is how. The principles and values that guide the way you work, what sets you apart, how you deliver your what. Most organizations can articulate their how if pressed. The innermost ring, the smallest, the rarest, is why. Not what you do, and not how you do it, but why. Your purpose, your cause, the belief that drives everything. Here's the critical point. Most organizations communicate from the outside in. They start with what, move to how, and rarely reach why at all. The typical pitch sounds like, we make computers. They're beautifully designed, easy to use, and really powerful. Want to buy one? That's logical. It's clear. And it almost never inspires. Apple communicates from the inside out. They start with why. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. Then how? The way we challenge the status quo is by making products that are beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And finally what? We happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Same information. Completely different effect. And this isn't an accident of marketing. It maps directly to how the human brain works. The golden circle corresponds almost perfectly to brain anatomy. The outer ring, what, aligns with the neocortex, the part responsible for rational thought, language, and analytical decision-making. The middle and inner rings, how and why, align with the limbic brain, the seat of emotions, intuition, trust, and loyalty. Critically, the limbic brain has no capacity for language. It feels things, but it can't explain them. This is why we so often struggle to explain the choices we're most committed to. You've probably felt it. You trust someone and you can't quite say why. You love a product and the best you can do is, it just feels right. You're loyal to a brand even when a competitor offers something technically better. That loyalty isn't irrational, it's limbic. It lives in the part of you that operates below the reach of words. When companies communicate from the outside in, starting with what, they reach only your neocortex. You might understand the logic. You might even agree. But something doesn't click. When they start with why, they reach the limbic brain first. You feel it before you can explain it. And that feeling is what drives decisions. Sinek's word for this is authenticity. Not authenticity in the vague modern sense of being yourself, but something more specific. When what you say and what you do both flow from the same core belief, people feel alignment. They sense that something is coherent, even if they can't name what it is. And when those things are out of alignment, when a company's words and actions pull in different directions, people feel that too, even if they can't explain why they don't trust it. The book isn't really about business strategy, though it has enormous implications for business. It's about something more fundamental, what it means to lead and what it takes to inspire. There's a word that comes up early in the book and stays with you: manipulation. Sinek uses it carefully. He's not describing bad people doing dishonest things. He's describing a set of strategies that most businesses rely on, almost without thinking. Strategies that work in the short term and cost you something important in the long run. Think about how most companies try to get your attention and your money. Price drops, promotions, limited time offers. Fear, don't get left behind. Aspiration, imagine the life you could have. Social proof, 9 out of 10 dentists agree. Novelty, all new, now with extra. These are all manipulations. And they work. They generate transactions. They move product. What they don't generate is loyalty. A customer who came to you because of a discount will leave when someone offers a bigger discount. A customer who came because of fear can be attracted by any competitor willing to stoke the same fear. There's nothing wrong with these customers, there's nothing wrong with discounts, but they're always looking for the best deal, never for you specifically. The relationship is transactional. When you stop offering the manipulation, it ends. Inspiration is different. Inspired customers, people who buy why you do something, not just what you sell, are loyal in a different way. They're willing to pay more. They're willing to wait. They'll drive past a competitor to get to you. They tell their friends, not because of a referral program, but because recommending you says something about who they are. This is the difference between Apple and, say, TVO. TVO had a genuinely superior product. The DVR it built in the late 1990s was leaps ahead of anything else available. They had funding, press coverage, and early buzz. And by almost every measure, TVO failed, or at least deeply underperformed what it should have been. Why? Because TVO marketed its what? Their pitch was about features: pause live TV, skip commercials, record things automatically. All true, all useful. But those pitches were aimed at the mass market, people who hadn't yet decided they needed a DVR. To reach those people, you don't lead with features. You lead with belief. And TVO never found their why. Sinek introduces a concept here called the Law of Diffusion of Innovations, originally developed by sociologist Everett Rogers. Every new product or idea spreads through a population in a predictable pattern. First come the innovators, about 2.5% of any market, people who love being first, who will try something new simply because it's new. Then come the early adopters, another 13%, people who are open to new ideas and willing to take some risk on things they believe in. Then the early majority, then the late majority, and finally the laggards. The tipping point, the moment when something moves from fringe to mainstream, happens when you reach somewhere between 15 and 18% of the market. That's where the curve breaks and adoption accelerates. But here's the key, you cannot reach the early majority by talking to them directly. The early majority waits to see what others do. They trust the early adopters. So if you want mass market success, you have to first reach the small group of believers, and believers respond to why, not what. This is what Apple understood. Their early products weren't for everyone. They were for people who already believed that the establishment was wrong, that creativity mattered, that tools should be joyful. Those believers, the innovators and early adopters, created the culture that the early majority eventually wanted to join. Not because of Apple's features, because of what being an Apple user meant. You can see this in something Sinek points out that's hard to explain otherwise. People tattoo Apple logos on their bodies. Not because Apple makes good hardware. Because owning Apple products says something about who you are. The brand became a symbol, and symbols only carry meaning when they represent a belief. The same logic applies to hiring, to partnerships, to internal culture. If you hire people because of their skills and credentials alone, you get capable people who will leave when a better opportunity comes. If you hire people who share your belief, who would work for this cause even if the pay were lower, you build a team with the kind of loyalty that doesn't require constant management. They're not working for you. They're working for the same thing you're working for. Sinek draws on an unusual example here. Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, reportedly placed an advertisement for crew members that read something like, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of darkness, constant danger. Safe return doubtful." The wording, real or apocryphal, attracted only people who were ready for exactly what was coming. When the expedition ran into catastrophe, the ship crushed by ice, the crew stranded, every single member survived. Not despite who they were, but because of who they were. They had signed up for hardship. It didn't break them. That's not luck. That's the power of recruiting for belief. There's a distinction the book makes that quietly changes how you think about leadership. The difference between leaders and those who lead. Leaders, Sinek says, are the ones with authority. The title, the power, the position. They can require compliance. They can fire people, set budgets, approve promotions. And in many organizations, this is exactly how things get done. Through the application of carrots and sticks, incentives and consequences. Those who lead are different. They inspire. People follow them not because they have to, but because they want to. And the distinction matters enormously because followers who are inspired bring something qualitatively different to their work than followers who are complying. He uses Martin Luther King Jr. as perhaps the book's most powerful example. On August 28, 1963, 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. No email, no social media, just word of mouth and a shared belief. King didn't say, "I have a plan." He said, "I have a dream." Not a policy proposal, not a roadmap. A vision of a world organized around a different belief. And critically, those 250,000 people didn't show up for King. They showed up for themselves. They were there because they believed what King believed. He gave voice to something that already lived in them. That's the nature of inspiration. You don't create it in people from scratch. You find the people who already carry it and you give them somewhere to stand. Now, Sinek is careful not to suggest that having a clear why is enough on its own. A why without the discipline to actually live it is just a nice idea. He identifies 3 things that have to work together. He calls them clarity, discipline, and consistency. Clarity of why means being able to articulate the belief at the core of what you do, in plain language, without corporate filler. Not, "We are committed to delivering excellence in customer-centric solutions," but something true and human. Something that explains why this company should exist in the world, beyond making money. Discipline of how means holding your values as active principles, not passive decorations. He makes a pointed observation here. Most companies list their values as nouns. Integrity, innovation, respect. But nouns sit still. They describe what you aspire to, not what you actually do. The discipline of how means turning values into verbs. Not integrity, but always do the right thing, even when it costs you. That's a standard you can actually measure behavior against. Consistency of what means that everything a company says and does, every product, every campaign, every customer interaction, must be a tangible proof of the why. The what is where your belief becomes visible. If your why is empowering people to think differently, every decision, what products you build, what partnerships you pursue, what campaigns you run, what you refuse to do, has to be able to answer the question, does this prove what we believe? Sinek offers a simple test he calls the Celery Test. Imagine you're at a grocery store and someone tells you that rice milk is great. Someone else swears by M&Ms. Another person recommends Oreos. A fourth tells you to get celery. Which do you buy? Without a why, without a clear belief to filter decisions through, you buy everything. Your cart is full, your spending is scattered, and your message is incoherent. But if your why is only put healthy things in my body, you walk right past the candy and go straight to the celery and the rice milk. And here's what Sinek adds. When you're standing in the checkout line, everyone around you can see what's in your cart. Your decisions become your communication. You don't have to explain yourself. The choices speak. This is what great brands actually do. When Apple made the iPod, it wasn't surprising, it was obvious. Of course they were going to challenge the music industry. Of course they were going to build a beautiful, joyful device. It fit. When Dell tried to make an MP3 player a few years later, it landed with a thud. Dell's why, if it can be articulated at all, is about reliable, affordable computing for the masses. An MP3 player doesn't prove that. It's just a product. Customers felt the mismatch even if they couldn't name it. And this brings us to one of the book's quieter but more important ideas, the difference between energy and charisma. Energy can be manufactured. A good night's sleep, a double espresso, a pep talk, these can make you seem motivated. But they fade. Charisma, in the way Sinek uses the word, isn't personality. It's the quality of someone whose conviction is bigger than themselves. You feel it not because they are performing enthusiasm, but because they genuinely believe in something, and their belief radiates. People follow charismatic leaders, in the deepest sense, because they can feel that the leader isn't in it for themselves. They're in it for the cause. Bill Gates doesn't walk into rooms and pump up crowds. But when he talks about putting a computer on every desk, or eradicating disease, you feel the weight of his conviction. That's charisma. That's what happens when why is clear. One of the most honest parts of the book is where Sinek turns to what he calls the split, the moment when many once inspired organizations start to lose their way. It often happens quietly, as success arrives. The founder who carried the why in their gut is now too far from the day-to-day to make every decision. Systems take over from intuition. The company grows, hires, expands, and somewhere in the scaling, the original belief gets diluted into slogans, mission statements, and quarterly metrics. Sinek uses Walmart as a cautionary example. Sam Walton built Walmart on a genuine belief that ordinary people deserved access to the same things that wealthy people could afford. He genuinely cared about his employees and his communities. "We're all working together," he said. "That's the secret." Under Walton, that belief was palpable. It shaped decisions from pricing to store design to how managers were expected to treat hourly workers. After Walton died, something shifted. Walmart continued to pursue low prices, but the why behind those low prices had changed, or at least blurred. The company began confusing its what, cheap goods, with its why, serve the common person. When you pursue low prices as a strategy rather than as an expression of a belief, you start making different decisions. You squeeze suppliers until they can't sustain themselves. You push down labor costs until you're the subject of class action lawsuits for wage violations. You move into communities whether they want you or not, because the system demands growth. And communities, sensing something different, start fighting to keep you out. The prices are still low, but the soul has changed. Contrast this with Southwest Airlines, which Sinek holds up as an organization that held its why through growth. Herb Kelleher, the founder, believed in championing the common person, specifically, the idea that flying should be accessible to people who couldn't previously afford it. Freedom was the why. Low prices were just the mechanism. That distinction sounds academic until you see how it plays out in decisions. When competitors created budget spin-offs to undercut Southwest, Delta launched Song, United launched TED, they copied the what? Low fares. No frills. They couldn't copy the why, because they didn't have one. Both failed. Southwest's culture, meanwhile, attracted employees who genuinely enjoyed their work. Flight attendants told jokes over the intercom. Gate agents handled delays with humor instead of apology. None of this was scripted. It flowed from people who believed in what they were doing. Sinek also looks closely at the relationship between founders and succession. Apple's story is nearly the perfect illustration. When Steve Jobs was pushed out in 1985, the company didn't lose its computers, it lost its why. John Scully understood markets and products. What he couldn't replicate was Jobs' belief. Without the why, Apple drifted. Products multiplied without purpose. Morale collapsed. The company nearly went bankrupt. When Jobs returned in 1997, he didn't save Apple by launching better products first. He reclarified the why. The Think Different campaign wasn't selling computers. It was re-establishing a belief. And once the belief was back, the products felt inevitable. Sinek calls this the school bus test. If the founder gets hit by a bus tomorrow, does the organization survive with its soul intact? The answer depends on whether the why has been built into the culture, the hiring, the decision-making systems. If it lives only in the founder, it dies with them. This connects to what Sinek calls the difference between achievement and success. Achievement is reaching the tangible goal, the revenue number, the market share, the award. Success is the feeling that comes from knowing why you're doing what you're doing. You can achieve everything on the list and still not feel it. He describes a gathering of highly successful entrepreneurs who had reached every financial milestone they'd set. When asked, 8 out of 10 said they didn't feel successful. The money was real. The recognition was real. But something was hollow. Somewhere in the pursuit of what, they had lost touch with why. Now, let's be honest about where this framework runs into limits. Start with why is a powerful lens, but it has real constraints. The biggest is that it can make the why sound like something you simply discover and then deploy. In practice, for most organizations, the why isn't waiting to be uncovered. It emerges through trial and error, through failure, through conversations with customers who tell you something you didn't know you believed. Sinek's framework is better at explaining success in retrospect than at guiding you forward from scratch. There's also a selection bias running through the book's examples. Apple, Southwest, Martin Luther King. These are among the most exceptional examples of clarity of purpose in modern history. The book doesn't spend much time on the vast majority of organizations with some why clarity that still struggled, for reasons the framework doesn't address. There's one more limitation worth sitting with. The book is almost entirely focused on inspiration from the top down. The founder, the leader, the visionary who radiates belief and gathers followers. It's a seductive model, and not a wrong one. But it can make organizations sound more messianic than they need to be, and it can leave people asking, what if I'm not the founder? What if I'm somewhere in the middle? Sinek doesn't fully answer that question here. He gestures at it, but the book is fundamentally written for the leader who sets the why, not the employee or manager trying to find meaning inside a system they didn't design. Despite those critiques, the book earns its place as a genuine contribution to how we think about leadership and communication. The closest book to it in spirit is probably Simon Sinek's own later work, Leaders Eat Last, which digs into the biological and social underpinnings of trust and safety in teams. Where Start with Why explains what inspires people to follow, Leaders Eat Last explains what keeps them. If the first book left you wanting more on the human side, the day-to-day culture, the neuroscience of belonging, that's where to go next. It fills the gap. Start with Why deliberately leaves open. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, let one question settle quietly in your mind. Not a hard question. Just a soft one to carry into tomorrow. Not, what are you working on? But, why does it matter? Why does this work, this project, this role, this thing you're building, why does it deserve to exist in the world? You don't have to answer it tonight. You just have to let it sit. The Wright brothers didn't win because they were smarter than Langley. They won because they cared about something beyond themselves. And that belief, it turned out, was enough to change everything. Sleep well. And we'll see you at Whispering Pages for the next one.